All right, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to another We Read the Documents live stream. Your host, Star Brissa. Thank you for being a subscriber. Today, I have with me dear brother in Christ, dear friend, researcher, teacher, Aaron Fauchman from Underground Publishing. Once again, for us to have a discussion. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great, John. How are you?
I'm doing good. I can't complain, brother. Another day God's given me. What can I say?
Amen.
If I complain, nobody will listen to me anyway. So. but anyway, I
You
was.
listen to me complain.
Yeah. You listen to me complain too.
We got one person.
So anyway, I've been watching the headlines and I've been, seeing what's going on and stuff like that. And I'm going back and rereading, prophecy in the Old Testament and prophecy in the New Testament as well, too. And it seems like to me that the way that things are going or the way things are happening is that it looks like now that from what happened yesterday when Trump had a discussion with Putin, and then you had kind of him saying the war is almost over, but could still go on because Trump is double-minded, double-tongued like Janus, right? So people are like, well, which one is it, Trump? Is it almost done, or is it is it going to go on? And Hegseth is contradicting him and saying it's going to go on or whatever, but. He spoke with Putin, and supposedly what they were speaking about was primarily the war in Ukraine. Putin supposedly taking more land the past few weeks in Ukraine, and supposedly Putin pushing for some sort of peace treaty in Ukraine, but them also discussing what is going on with the war in Iran, and hinting, from what I can see based off of the news reports, and maybe I'm mistaken, hinting at some sort of peace treaty eventually within the few weeks, maybe towards Easter, like people are saying, where we pull out, right? And you have Trump also saying he's furious with Israel for them attacking the oil storage in Tehran, right? Which is bad optics because, one, it directly hurts the Iranian people, right?
And the world's oil economy.
Yes, exactly. Which, and so Trump supposedly is furious at Bibi Netanyahu for that because the Israelis supposedly, allegedly, if you believe the narrative, just went and did it. Trump didn't know.
Which I would believe, and it pushes a bunch of people that we had gotten to do what we wanted to now say we need to buy oil from Russia now.
Yes, that was also talked about.
Them more financing for their war effort.
So, Trump's talk with Putin. So supposedly, what I believe this might be setting up, and I could be wrong because we don't know for sure how this is going to completely play out, as far as what's the intricacies of what's going on day to day. But I would say that the way things are looking, and I could be off, is we withdraw. We might attack Iran for a few more weeks with Israel. We eventually withdraw. And because of that, a peace in Ukraine happens in the next few weeks or few months. There's some sort of treaty involved with that. And we continue to take over our interests in what they build the new shield of Americas in America, right? Like Cuba, supposedly, allegedly, has been without power 4 or 5 days straight, supposedly. Right. And I'm hearing rumors of uprisings in Cuba. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But Trump keeps saying Cuba's going to fall any day now. We're not even going to have to do military action. They're going to fall, Yeah. So, again, how much of that is talk, how much of that is real, I don't know. But, that is what is being reported. The price of gas is going back up, obviously, because the war is not over yet. Trump, was a massive pump and dump yesterday over the weekend where the price of oil went to $115, $120 a gallon, roughly, a barrel, I meant. And then, down all the way is the biggest up and drop in history of down to like 86, somewhere around there. And now it's going back over 90. So, I will see. I do believe that there eventually will be, quote unquote, peace in Ukraine and Russia, where Russia has conceded a certain amount of Ukrainian territory. Russia.
Well, I don't think Russia's going to give territory back. Do you?
No. I said Russia's going to get some Ukrainian territory.
Okay. Yes.
And Ukraine is going to be smaller as far as its borders on the world map. And then Russia will go on from there. Probably some threats in Georgia, possibly, which has been discussed as far as Georgian terrorism affecting Russia.
Yeah,
And so,
Georgia, Azerbaijan, you're gonna probably see that
so
next.
what? So what? Am I off? And what is what at least being reported in
No,
the
I
news?
think you're generally on. I think if we approach it from strategic interest, so think about the players. We've got Iran, Russia, America, Israel. Those are the main four, and then Turkey's the black horse. Okay,
Hmm.
so I've been hearing this from multiple sources, and obviously all the sources are propagandized right now, and they're either peddling propaganda or they have their own agenda. Like I'll hear
Yes.
a source that's like, "Oh, we need to take out China," blah blah blah. Well, who is it? Oh, it's Falun Gong, right? Like Falun Gong is a cult that's persecuted by China. That's what the Epoch Times is based on, right? So you have to know the sources and you have to know what their bents are. But there's a lot of people that I want to see, like Pavlovi. Oh yeah, just go in Iran and then install me, right? Like there's a lot of people that are seeing America as being unhinged right now, and they'll go to war with anybody. And so there's a lot of people that would love to see America go to war, exhaust their resources going to war, and then see themselves gain in the aftermath, right?
Hmm.
And this is what happens in a world war. You have a lot of smaller parties, a lot of smaller nations and cultural groups that want to see their own interests advance, and so they want the big powers to fight because then the big powers can't step in when their lower level powers come in and take over or genocide the people next door or whatever they're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So the main ones we want to look at these five guys and Iran, even though it's projecting power through terrorism and it has been for years, what it really is trying to do, we're talking, forget Islamic Jihad as a motivator, think just geopolitical economic interests, right? They're trying to negotiate towards Iranian oil being able to go to Europe. Okay? They can't really, they're never going to get the price for oil from India and China that they could be getting from Europe, right? And if they really want to advance as a civilization, some kind of normalization of ties with Europe that involves them sending them oil like Russia has been. Because if they can
Hmm.
normalize ties with Russia, who's been a strategic enemy for decades, there's no reason they can't with Iran. And the whole idea of going, hey, we could nuke you, but we would rather trade oil with you is a very good proposition from Iran, right? The point is the nukes are just looked at. This is here so that the big bad Satan doesn't invade us, which they have a viable reason to say that because CIA and MI6 overthrew a democratically elected leader in Iran to install the Shah, which caused the Islamic Revolution just 75 years ago, right? So Europe is not pro that, right? Europe has mostly been dominated by the Anglo-American establishment since the end of World War II. And so they're not pro that. So they could be open to trading oil with Iran. So you see Rand doing their stuff with their proxies, and what their proxies is about hurting Israeli and Saudi interests in the Middle East as basically a negotiation avenue towards getting that oil. Now, do they have a wider Islamic revolution bent? Do they want to see the Mahdi come and all that? Well, yeah, like we want to see Christ come, and you have certain American factions who think if we pull on this lever, we can make it happen faster, right? But from the standard of a people group to act like they're just these crazy zealots and that's the only thing driving them in practical geopolitical and economic circumstances is not on their palette of thinking at all. It's just stupid,
We have a
right?
good amount of Iranians that are Persian.
Right, they're Persian there, but there's like four different major ethnic groups in Iran. So their plan is always to
Kurds.
hold that core, but what they want to see is the center of Islam shift from Saudi Arabia to them.
Hmm.
That's part of their bigger geostrategy, and obviously the capacity to strengthen their economy is fundamental to heading in that direction, right? So would they like to one day see themselves taking over the holy sites in Mecca and Jerusalem? Sure, but as a starting point, they need to get a good funnel of oil from which they could expand their economy and expand their base of influence, not necessarily through war. While meanwhile they keep, plausibly, deniably funding terrorist groups that are supposedly weakening and frustrating their enemies while they continue to gradually expand towards Iraq and, maybe even the other direction towards Pakistan, right? So that's just looking at Iran from a perspective of just like, what do you want? What's your goal? And how would you get there geostrategically, right? Um, Israel's goal is more like, if we can expend America's resources to weaken Iran to the point where it would take them 20, 30 years to really have the capacity to launch a counterattack to what we want to do, we can propose Greater Israel as a measure of the Abraham Accords as a way to basically gain control of things all the way over to Iraq. We make room for a bunch of Jews to come back to the Mediterranean coast of from America, and then we can bank on the mutual disinterest of Russia and Turkey to say even if Turkey doesn't like us, they don't want Russia in the Middle East in a big way because that's distinct from their interests. And so what you would have then is a de facto deal based on mutual disinterest towards Russia and Iran to say, all right, well, Turkey and Israel got to work together. Let's take over
And that's what
Western
happened to
Iraq.
Syria. That's what happened to the
Right.
destabilization of Syria.
Exactly. And so you could be like, hey, we don't like each other, and you can keep on talking crap about us. But the point is, you know, we'll take over this, and then you can have your buffer against the Kurds. Because remember, the Kurdish zone is in Iran,
Mm-hmm.
Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And the reality of what was proposed for the breakup of the Ottoman Empire in the turn of the 20th century was a much larger Armenian state. This is why they had the Armenian genocide, because there are lots of Armenians in eastern Turkey,
Mm-hmm.
and then a Kurdish state, right? So those things didn't come to fruition because of all the Pikes-Picot deals and stuff like this after World War One, but we're dangling a Kurdish state in front of them now if they would help us against Iran. Now, they're not going to do that, and the reason is because of all the peoples in the Middle East, the only people who have been consistently treated the Kurds well is Iran. Of all of those countries, I mean, we have screwed the Kurds since the 90s, right? And then we've let ISIS go at them. We've let Turkey abuse them, even though they're a NATO ally, right? And so, yeah, do they have a terrorist group against Turkey? Of course. Why? Because Turkey's got their land. You got to remember the Turks had a revolution after they lost World War One.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
Ottoman Empire was broken up, and we had this plan to break up Turkey, and then the Turks said no, and they went and fought, and they got this bigger state that they have now. But they did it by taking land that was supposed to go to the Kurds and the Armenians, right? And so, of course, there's going to be animosity there. And Turkey has a vested interest in seeing they've walled off their whole country, right? And to see a strong border between them and the Armenians in Syria as well, which would couple very well with Israel's interest to control all the way up to the Euphrates River to make sure there's a huge defense against Iran coming through. So that's your greater Israel strategy, right? And of course, the fact that they're talking about that loud and clear right now, and you have guys like Huckabee talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
says that we would like to see that too, because then we can pull out of the Middle East. And so we want to pull out of the Middle East. Israel would love to see themselves as basically the center of a strategy between the interests of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and then buffer the interests of Turkey and Saudi Arabia against the interests of Iran and Russia. And Israel plays the centerpiece of that, and they can manipulate, but they're not the front lines of any of it, right? So you would basically have probably a shared Arab force down through Kuwait because they would all have interests that would not want to see Iran come in and
Mm-hmm.
take over. And then you would have, obviously Jordan holding their zone, and then Turkey and Israel holding zones of the Euphrates
Is
River,
that why
essentially.
we see Iraq and Iran coming together right now?
Yes, because and this is what I believe from the beginning is that Iraq is going to take up at least up to the Tigris River, but probably up to the other side of the Euphrates. If anything, the Iranians might allow the Kurds to have a state
Like a
in
Kurdistan?
northern Iraq. Yes, yes, yes. Like that's their state, and then there's a shared. just people group between them, just like there are people who are related to the Afghanis and the Pakistans in eastern Iran, but it's still Iran.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Is that why
But
Israel turned down the Kurds? And supposedly they were who turned down the Kurds' involvement in what's going on right now of kind of get them to have a revolution against Iran.
I I don't think they have shared interests. Nobody really has shared interests with the Kurds. What we always just do is because the Kurds are a
We just use
stateless
them.
people, we use them
Yeah.
and we say, yeah, go fight these people, and then we never back them up as they get their butts
Yeah, because
kicked down.
Israel, they were talking about America and Israel using the Kurds to strike back at Iran, but then but that was chosen not to happen, from what I've
Right.
seen. So they were
And
not
remember
armed by
that
the
the
CIA
Kurds are the
and Mossad.
descendants of the ancient Medes, and the Medes and the Persians have always worked hand in hand.
Yeah.
So if we look for something like a new, again, a Kurdish autonomous zone in Iraq, or even a formal Kurdish state after World War III, it would still be in the sphere of Iran.
Okay.
That's the point. They're ethnically linked. So Turkey is kind of the wild card where, again, it never they're a NATO ally because they have been an enemy with Russia. They have nothing in common with Europe, and everybody knows it. They have no benefit from the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and being given to all these Arabs, right? But the wars between Turkey and Russia have gone on since the fall of Constantinople in the 14th century, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And this tradition of seeing Russia as the bigger threat, because Russia's tried to just take over Turkey in the past. If you go before World War One to the Crimean War, the Crimean War had, like, I think it was like France, England, and I forget who else. It might have been Germany, but they all came to Turkey's aid against Russia. This is like, I want to say like 30 years before World War One, because their big fear is Russia has this massive resource base, but if they were to get a place like Turkey, now they control the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and they have access to the Mediterranean. There's nothing to stop them from growing up like in America and just selling cheap goods. They have lots of resources, and of course, this was before oil economy really came into the picture. But it's like that's terrifying to them because Russia could become this monstrous superpower that would be unstoppable. And so the idea of having a militarily strong Turkey between them and Russia, or at least as a wild card against Russia's interest that could potentially open up another front against Russia if they got into it, has always been in Europe's interests, okay? Even though they hate the Turks, they don't like Islam, right? Like historically, they don't want Islam in America. Remember, there was a point where Turkey had taken over all the way up to Austria during the Ottoman era, right?
Hmm.
And all of Europe tried to gather against them and lost. They got their butts kicked all the way down through the times of like John Huss, like basically the generation before the Reformation. So they have, it's again, my enemy's enemy is my friend, right? That's the main play in geopolitics. It's my enemy's enemy is my friend, and it's not about like and dislike. It's about mutual interests and disinterests. And so obviously, Saudi Arabia's interest now falls squarely into the camp of Israel because they don't want Turkey to be their sole defense against Russia and Iran because Turkey used to control the Ottoman Empire.
Hmm.
All of their territories and kingdoms were basically taken from the Turks, right? And so to have Israel as kind of the main arbiter in the balance between them, whereas like Turkey and Israel don't really like each other, and Israel's overtones towards the Arabs are way more friendly. You're seeing the Arabs get way more
The
friendly towards Israel
UAE, Kuwait, for example, Kuwaiti
because
Americans.
they can balance out Turkey and Israel against each other as people who don't like each other but need each other against the wider threat of Russia and
Hmm.
Iran,
Hmm.
right? So all of this is all of this geostrategic thinking is in light of America being out of the Middle East. The understanding is America cannot bog themselves down in the Middle East forever. The American people don't want it. It's not economically sustainable. It's not militarily sustainable. We have too many fronts on other sides of the world that we have to concern ourselves with. Plus, we have economic problems at home, right? We've got $38 trillion in debt that we got to deal with, and a huge, huge, huge portion of that has been military expenditures since 2000.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I mean, in 25 years, you're probably looking at like two-thirds of that debt is military, right?
Hmm.
So we would love to dial down how much military expenditures we're sending out of the world, basically have the Western Hemisphere on lock, have friendly, stable powers everywhere, and with the exception of maybe like Brazil, like not having a puppet in Brazil, but having enough other friendly powers in the region, Colombia, Venezuela, and otherwise, that Brazil would never try anything in terms of trying to become a hegemon in South America or anything like that, right? Because they are a BRICS partner, right? So the idea is again, the Monroe Doctrine, we control everything over here. We're able to project over there, but what we are able to do is then dial things back to kind of like a pre-World War II phase where we're mostly minding our own business. Our partners in Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, England, Israel, they are holding the lines where they're at, and then we build up our strength towards if another world war breaks out to being able to say, well, you've awakened the sleeping giant again, here we come and we're going to turn the tide. But the point is we do it after everybody else has exhausted themselves like we did in World War II,
Hmm.
right? That's our ideal goal. If we're thinking carnally in the flesh, no thinking religiously, no thinking about eschatology, that would be our ideal goal. And if you listen to Trump and his spokespeople on Congress as they're getting drilled over the Iran war, that's basically the strategy they're saying. They're saying we are trying to dial back, but what we're trying to do is weaken our primary enemies to the point where our partners in the region, who obviously we hope to sell weapons to, can hold them down from here, which the main ones would be then North Korea and Iran, right? There is no version of this where we hope everybody to pin down China, but we do hope to contain China that if they take Taiwan, that's all they can do,
Hmm.
right? There's too many competitive powers in the Middle East. And you're seeing a balance start to form between China, South Korea, and Japan, who, let's remember, two of them were attacked by one of them 75 years ago, right? That wasn't a long.
India going to Israel, Modi going to meet with Bibi.
Well, and Modi meeting with Bibi, that's simple. It's just, they would love to see Chinese manufacturing towards Europe shift to India. That is a route that would take them through Dubai, through Saudi Arabia by rail to the Mediterranean Sea through Israel. So that is something that's in the playbook. Israel's been talking about that now for several years, and it makes geopolitical sense. Again, so the idea is you're seeing the world shift from a containing from a 20th century containment of the Soviet bloc, right, to a 21st century containment of China. And the idea is like we're not going to stop China from being a competitive power, but we're keeping them from becoming a dominant power. That's the point, right? And the idea is if they're not a dominant power, then America can back off. We can hopefully see Russia kind of exhaust itself and get to a point where it's content to just sell oil to Europe at a fair price and oil to China at a lower price to maintain itself, but never project power outside of Russia. We would love to see Russia become a Canada,
Hmm.
right? It's not going to happen. I mean, they have a long, long history. This is Magog, right? They have a long history of being this massive empire who has the capacity, like in America, to come and turn the tide of a big major world war because of their huge resource base and population, right? And that's who they've been historically, going all the way back to when the Japhethites overthrew the empire of Naram-Sin and Sargon, right? Like, they come in, and here's these guys, and these are Aryans coming in, and they overthrow everything, and then they leave. And then you have the Medes and the Persians do the same thing. They come into Assyria and Babylon, they overthrow everything, and then they eventually back off. You have the Scythians, you have the Mongols, you have the Huns, and the ultimate final heir of all that is Russia. It's the big Soviet bear, right? Like, and what happens? Well, Napoleon gets too big for his britches. He messes with Russia. Russia comes in, kicks everyone's butt, and that allows the other powers of Europe to put down Napoleon, right? Same thing with Hitler. Hitler gets too big for his britches, messes with Russia. Russia comes in, and he allows the Western powers then to take out Hitler, right? We wouldn't have been able to take out Hitler without the massive front of power that Russia projected against him on the east,
Yeah, if
right?
Hitler would have made it to Moscow and would have put Russia down, yes.
Right, and for all intents and purposes, if we're talking about what is just geopolitically, Russia had every right to control the Eastern Bloc because why? Because between the 1700s and the 20th century, so over a 200-year period, you basically had somebody take over all of Europe twice and try to invade Russia,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So the most reasonable thing you would want from the Russians is saying, okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to pin down half of Russia to make sure this never happens again, right? Because I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of Russians killed because somebody was able to take over all of Europe. So from a Russian perspective, we're not the crazy ones. It's these Europeans that have some madman take over the whole continent and then try to attack us, right? It's not like they started anything with Germany or with Napoleon,
Hmm.
right? It was just like these guys were just madmen who were like, we're going to take over everything, right? And so they invade Russia, and Russia's like, this is never going to happen again. And what we do is we turn it into this religious ideological war against atheistic communism, when in reality is that only existed in Russia at that point for 40 years in their entire history. They
Hmm.
were Eastern Orthodox Christians from the 1200s to the turn of the 20th century. And the only reason that they were Marxists now is because Germans helped move Lenin and a bunch of gold and a bunch of stuff over to start a revolution in Russia to overthrow them to get them out of World War One.
Yeah.
So the communist power in Russia was always temporary. It was never organic. It came from outsiders because communism started in France and Germany. That's where all the writers came from. Marx lived in England. Engels lived in England and Germany. Like, it didn't start with them. It was spread to them from Europeans as a way to, because they never had this clear transition from, feudalism and peasantry and all this stuff toward parliamentary democracy like the rest of Europe had, right? They went right from that to pretty much communism. So it's like communism looked like it, for one, it was not a radical change from the feudalism they had. It was basically just a shift from having a bunch of nobles and feudal lords where they were digging in the poop and, I didn't vote for you. They were those people. And now they were basically that to now a communist bureaucracy, right? So it wasn't a radical change for the Russian people, but they also didn't have the broad educational base and the, if you will, the rationalist enlightenment within their country to say, no, we want democracy, we want representation, right? We were because of where they were in their position in world history, we were able in the West, the Western interests were able to launch communism against them, right? And then of course same thing with China, right? They go to from their feudal system of basically having kings and lords and stuff like that, and that's I think it was the Manchu dynasty, and then because of World War II, they're able to launch communism there, and this, there's a whole story there, right? But the point is Russia was never an organic threat to Europe because it's never invaded Europe except in its own self-defense. Ever. Ever in the history of everything. Unless you count the Mongols, but the Mongols only got as far as Poland. That's the furthest they got because the reality is that huge wide base, yes, it's able to project power and kick butt and take names in any direction from that base, but it has massive supply lines and the ability to hold that territory together. Remember, this is not like a mono-ethnic, nationalist group here. There are a bunch of different tribal groups, and it's usually one of them that ends up being dominant over the others. And they're able to project power outward, but there eventually comes to a point where it's like, okay, it's not going to hold together if they keep trying to advance towards denser and more technologically advanced powers like China, like Europe, right? There's a limit to how far they can go, and there's a limit to how far they've always wanted to go, right? And that general territory, that general limit, has always been basically the territory of the Mongol Empire or Russia. The idea of having that all united, where you can travel from one end of it to the other, and you have a power that's basically holding it together, and you have ethnic groups that are mostly allowed to do their own thing within the context of their ethnic quarters,
Hmm.
but they have this wider bureaucracy that allows them to trade across this wider empire, has always been pretty much the extent of their desires. It's only in recent period where, Europe's tried to box Russia out of having any access. I mean, and that would be what we would want, is to see Russia can't sell oil to anybody but China. And China can't pay the price that anybody else can pay, and that would allow Russia to basically weaken and dwindle down and be like Canada, right? We would
Hmm.
love to see Russia be China's Canada, right? not be this nuclear power anymore because it takes a lot of money to maintain nukes, right? And not need to be that because their borders are basically secure. And then, we can go in and get favorable deals on the stuff we want from the resource base in the West and never worry about them becoming a real competitive power. And that would be probably satisfactory to Russia, except for one big problem, and that's Turkey. See, Turkey is ethnically related to all of the Stan countries as far as the Xinjiang or Xinjiang, the province of the Uyghurs in China. So you're talking about from China all through the Stan countries, all the way over to Azerbaijan and Turkey. Those are all Turkish peoples. And Turkey has talked about not just a revival of the Ottoman Empire, but also a revival of this pan-Turkestan, which has never existed, but I mean, the closest thing to it would be like the Scythians, which were never really a united front, but it's kind of like a tribal confederacy that was allies with the Medes at one point in time. But is to have like all these Turkish countries linked, and then that becomes a massive funnel for natural gas and oil and rare earth minerals and all that stuff towards Europe, with Turkey at the head of it becoming richer and richer and richer, and Russia is just entirely boxed out from the European economy. They literally are China's Canada. That's what they don't want to become, right? Is China's Canada. So Turkey has been this threat, and again, you and I have talked about Vladimir Zhirinovsky's book, My Struggle, where he talks about the last push to the south. Have you had a chance to read that yet?
I am working my way through it.
Okay, and that's again, Vladimir Zhirinovsky. He died right after the initial Ukrainian invasion, but he did call out when they were going to do it before he died. Okay, and in his book, Last Push to the South, he envisioned a world in which basically China, Russia, Europe, and America essentially each governed the economic South below them, right? And so he saw Russia as being dominant over pretty much the Stan countries, India, Pakistan, Iran, and the Middle East. Europe dominant over Africa, China dominant over Southeast Asia and Oceania, and America dominant over the Latin America, basically. Okay, this is how he thought the world should be in balance. Which, to be fair, you go all the way back to Noah, and you have the idea of the Japhethites being the dominant power. That is essentially the manifestation of that, right? If you understand, like the Northern Han Chinese are Japhethites, the Russians are Japhethites, the European, pretty much Germanic peoples are Japhethites, and then the North American, pretty much Germanic peoples are Japhethites, right? So this idea of a Japhethite world order is actually ordained by Noah, and this is his version of it. And in that context, he saw Russia, he saw the smartest thing for them to do is to go down and break up both Iran and Turkey into their distinct ethnic populations. So again, like we talked about, Armenia, Kurds, I think it's the Balochistans, which are basically on the border between Iran and Pakistan, so they overlap them. And I think it was Punjabis, or I might get the two mixed up. I think Punjabis is Pakistan and Iran, and then the Balochistanis, I think, are Afghanistan and Iran. So those are ethnic groups that are there. And the Iranians, the Persians, which are the main Iranian tribe of the original Aryans, they would have kind of the center of Iran, but they would never have a base to project power outside of Iran. They would just be another ethnic group. They'd have pretty good territory because they'd have, front on the Indian Ocean, they'd have oil and stuff like that, but they wouldn't be this wider sphere. And then the same thing with Turkey. They would break it up between, I think, Turks. I think there are Greek peoples there, Armenians and Kurds, which is basically what we planned on doing after World War I anyway, right? So the idea is breaking all that up and then breaking up the Middle East into their ethnic groups and balkanize them. And this is the traditional Russian strategy, is to see them as the united power ruling over a bunch of different ethnicities, while the nations around their borders are balkanized so they could potentially play them off against each other. Now, it's a huge ask for Russia. That's not in anyone else's interest, but that has been their political idea throughout history, and that's what Zhirinovsky was proposing. And in the final chapter of his book, he basically says how he calls it the last push to the south. It's literally Gog-Magog. If you read the last chapter of his book, you're like, so he's proposing the Gog-Magog invasion, right? He doesn't get into North Korea as allies and stuff like that. He also doesn't pull in Iran necessarily as an ally because he sees them as another inferior people that Russia should break up. But it's basically, what they plan to do is come in and take over the Middle East. It's Gog Magog, right? And so what we're seeing right now, again, this is me 20 years ago in my undergrad talking to a Ukrainian and asking what they think of Vladimir Zhirinovsky over there. And this is a Russian who lives in Ukraine. And she said everybody in Russia loves Vladimir Zhirinovsky because he says all the things that people want to hear that Putin can't say. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at what what Putin is doing is largely related to his strategy. That's why the Russian people really like it. People don't realize how the Russian people have been historically treated as like this inferior, weak people, even though the Russian people have produced, first of all, they helped win World War II, just like America did. They first people to get people in space. They developed their nuclear program, all this stuff, and they have a huge scientific base. They consider themselves like we're one of the top players in the advancement of world science, right? And yet we're treated like we're this inferior backwater bunch of barbarians, right? Mm-hmm. They don't like that. And so the fact that Putin is pushing Russian weight around and demonstrating on the world stage that no, we are up there with the great nations of the world have ever been, right? The Russians love that. They absolutely love it. They see themselves as, and again, remember, they're not all Russian peoples, but most of the peoples in the East are Russian, and the predominant people throughout Russia are Russian, right? Mm-hmm. They're Muscovites. They're basically Slavic Muscovites, Russians, and Kievan Rus, and people who have some relation to the Ukrainians, but they are distinct people, right? And Ukraine was always part of their domain. There was never a time in Russia's history up until the fall of the Soviet Union that Ukraine was not part of the Russian domain, right? And so it's not just there as part of their domain. Controlling the West, controlling Ukraine would allow them. I mean, look how easily Ukraine was able to invade Russia and take a chunk of Russia for a while, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if they had the backing of NATO, they could come in and they could completely cut off Russia's supply line to the Middle East. They could also take Moscow and Stalingrad, which is what Hitler tried to do, right? And Hitler's starting point was not Ukraine. Hitler's starting point was Austria, right? So, like, if we were able to get a NATO-friendly government there, we know what we would do. We would pile bases on Russia's border, and now we would be able to amass troops on Russia's border from the Balkan countries, from Sweden, and from Ukraine to sit there and go, you got to remember, it's just flat land all the way to Moscow.
Yeah.
The amount of Russian lives it would cost to defend Moscow if we had ever been the aggressor, and let's face it, we have been the aggressor in the past, right? They need Ukraine at least up to the Dnieper River as a buffer, because that river at least is big enough where it would be tough to cross, and they could blow the bridges and all that stuff and hold a defensive line there for some time, and then reinforce Belarus, take the Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and then basically be able to launch a front of sub-warfare to keep people from invading Russia. Remember, Russia's mentality is defensive, and we keep trying to paint it as offensive while we're clearly offensive, right? We're offensive everywhere in the world, right? So when you understand things from these people's perspective, they look at it as like America controls the oceans and they have the navies and the air forces everywhere, and so they just shoot at people everywhere and then say, give us stuff. Give us your resources or we'll shoot at you. Now we're doing it wantonly. We're saying out loud, give us your resources. We're going to decide who your presidents are going to be, and they're going to be people who give us your resources.
Yeah, I mean, that's openly what we did down there in Venezuela. It's openly what Trump is saying in Iran.
Right, and all of the media in the West is controlled by half a dozen countries. So what we are saying in the West, it doesn't matter if it's France, if it's England, if it's us, we're all saying stuff that is pretty much pro-Western, and all of the West benefits economically from America's bullying around the world. But in the East, when you talk about Russia, the stand countries, Iran, all the way over to China, that's two-thirds of the planet in terms of people.
And right now, on top of that, you have Israel and the world, understanding what is happening as far as Israel, and almost the way that it's making appearance, which I believe to be true, is Israel controlling
The
the
U.S.,
United
right?
States of America. Yeah.
Which the entire world is saying now.
Yes.
It's not just the leftists in America. The entire world is saying, because that's the easiest way to divide the American interest, to say, screw this, we are not fighting Israel's wars. We're not exhausting our economy. We're definitely not dying for Israel, right? Which is reasonable. It's completely, when you take the Bible out of the equation, take eschatology out of the equation, that is perfectly reasonable. We look at Iraq and Afghanistan and we go, well, that benefited Israel somewhat and a few rich companies in the U.S., but did it benefit your average American?
No.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all, right? And now you're talking about doing this again? This is not good. It's like a Vietnam scenario, right? And so we look at the East, and it's like, the reality is with the exception of, certain interest in India, but let's face it, these interests in India, they're not really, they don't really believe they're going to expand their Indian companies outside of India. They're not going to. It's just a handful of rich families that basically control all the wealth in India, and India just is never going to compete with China and Europe in terms of exports and stuff like that, in terms of the quality of their products, right? You have countries like Vietnam, who, yes, they would love to, they hate America historically because of what we did, but they're friendly with us because, China has tried to invade Vietnam since we did, right? And so, we're a balance of power with them. You've got people like the Philippines, these people that, again, they want access to the American economy. They want to be our call center jobs and stuff like that, right? They would love to have an opportunity to marry an American and move over here because of where the money is. And so there's enough people on that side of the world that like America's economy, but they don't care about America's policy. While there's a lot of people who hate America's policy. And when you talk about this fear of the Chinese, all of the Islamic countries, Russia and North Korea, that's a ton of people. And of those countries, 3 of them have nukes. So they're never going to sit here and go, you know what? Yeah, let's let America play us off against each other until we're all just run by trannies and puppet presidents that are giving America our resources, right? Because that is what we are loudly projecting as the ultimate outcome we desire, and the only outcome we'll be satisfied with, right? So there's so much on that side of the world that says America is evil. Like they're this big fascist economy that basically just wants everything, and they're completely full of hubris. They want Iran to apologize for, well, first of all, we mock Iran for apologizing to the countries that they struck our bases in. And here's Iran sitting here going, America just bombed the crap out of us, and so we attacked America's bases in your country.
Bombed a school, right?
Yeah, but there are oil resources, all this stuff, right? And so they're literally their foreign ministers here going, why did you apologize to them if you're not the one in the wrong? Like treating us like we're the aggressor. We did this. And it's like, well, no, we didn't do this. We threw missiles at Israel. Now, of course, they did through their proxy terrorist groups. But in terms of Iran proper, right, they're sitting here going, they attacked us, and so we apologized to our Middle Eastern neighbors for our need to attack their sovereign territory because they're housing American bases that are attacking us, right? Mm-hmm. And we're looking at them like, you should apologize to us for fighting back. Oh, by the way, we're picking your next leader. No, you're not. Have you invaded our country and taken it over? No, you're not. You think you just throw a bunch of bombs at us and we're just going to lay down and be like, okay, why don't you pick our government? No country in the world is going to do that. No matter how much you could bomb them into the Stone Age, it doesn't matter unless you're there occupying the country. And let's face it, we already tried to do this in Iraq and Afghanistan and failed.
Yeah.
Because the government in Afghanistan or Iraq wants us out, and they're pro-Shia. the government in Afghanistan pretty much kicked us out, right? So we lost there. And you're sitting here going, okay, you went and did this. Remember, Iran is a huge mountainous plateau, which we hoped to have a foothold in Afghanistan and a foothold in Iraq from which we could eventually take over Iran, right? And we are out of both of those countries. In fact, we were supposed to, Joe Biden made a deal with Iraq that we were supposed to be out in September of last year. Out completely, right? So we spent trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan to accomplish not even having the bases that we wanted to have to attack Iran, and now we're attacking Iran as if we're just going to pull up our entire navy there and just bomb the crap out of them, and then they're just going to lay down, right? And they're sitting here going, no, no, no. This is a government willing to kill 50,000 of their own people to put down a civil revolt. You think because you bomb our people, that's going to hurt us? Like, you bomb our people and the people are going to be like, oh, this is our government's fault for, back when they used to sponsor terrorism when all those terrorist groups are now dead, right? Like, and, we're just going to let America bomb. And no, they're not going to roll over. Those people are going to rally to their governments because the government is not saying, we want to see a democratic process in Iran.
But wouldn't that unify the Iranian people?
It is unifying the Iranian people because we're not going in there and saying we want to see a free democratic process in Iran that the UN is overseeing.
No,
we're saying
we're going to put whoever we want to put in there.
Donald Trump gets to handpick your next president, or we're going to keep bombing you, right? No people group in the world is going to be like, oh, that seems fair. No, it's like the reason the Islamic Revolutionary Guard is in place is because we overthrew a democratically elected leader. And what are we proposing? Either Donald Trump gets to handpick your president, or the other thing is Israel is saying, how about the son of the guy that we put in when we overthrew your democratically elected government, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody is saying to the Iranian people, you have a right to self-determination, just no Islamic Republic. They're not offering them self-determination.
No, they're not.
They're saying, we're going to put either an Israeli puppet or an American puppet over your country, and we're going to bomb you until you say, yes, please. This is...
Which is wicked. It's straight up wicked.
It's wicked. It's horrible geopolitical strategy. And not only that, it's only going to galvanize every Muslim in the surrounding regions to them. They're going to be like, hey, we could get them out of Afghanistan and we can get them out of Iraq, but we're going to let them take Iran? No. What are they going to do if they take Iran? They're going to go right back into Iraq and Afghanistan. They're going to control everything from pretty much Pakistan to Israel. The Americans are going to control it, right? And all of a sudden, that's going to be a permanent base zone from which then they can start screwing with Russia and the stand countries and pulling all those resources away from Russia until it's China's Canada.
So what does Russia end up doing to this as far as, Russia, North Korea?
Russia's plan, Russia's strategy was always at a minimum. They really want all of Ukraine, but at a minimum to take it up to the Dnieper River, which would require them taking Kiev. Odessa is a Russian city built by Russians. That is actually west of the Dnieper River, to take pretty much all of the Black Sea coast, because that's what they would need to basically be able to launch a naval campaign, a potential naval campaign against Turkey that could not be competed with in the Black Sea, right? Because right now, the Ukrainians are able to attack their ships in the Black Sea, right? So the idea is to control all of that. So the Ukrainians, if they're anything independent, it's west of the river. But the reality is Russia wants all of Ukraine, because that's always been a part of Russia. What they would settle for as a minimum is up to the river, so that then that would be a safe zone between them and the Russia supply base that they would run through Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and take over all of the countries between Russia and Iran. And now they have a steady supply line to Iran where they don't have to fly planes. Because remember, we control the airspace over Iran, right? Mm-hmm. It's only by grace that we're not shooting down those planes that are giving Iran weapons, right? So what they're trying to do, and I believe China is boring tunnels through the mountains of Azerbaijan now, like Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, because those are very narrow passways. There's only like a couple of highways that go through there, and they're not super big highways. Is to bore tunnels where you can have steady highways going through there that are protected by mountains.
Yeah.
So that you can pour unlimited weapons into Iran as a front from which you can project power into the Middle East. And you basically have Iran would become to the SCO, Russia and China's bloc, what Turkey is to NATO, a mountainous, well armed territorial defensive buffer between their interests. And then from there, you can actually have a real competition for who gets to take over the Middle East.
Yeah.
Once they do that, of course, if they can exhaust America to go, okay, we just spent our stockpile of munitions. We're telling people we've got plenty of munitions left over. No, we don't. We've been selling this stuff to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we have so much stuff that is based on parts and electronics and things like that come from China, and we have so much stuff that is like offshore manufacturing, and then we've got commitments to Europe and all these other allies as far as Australia, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if we exhaust our supply, we have to leave. We're not leaving because we're like we've accomplished our objective. We're leaving because we shot all our stuff at them, right? So we shot all our stuff at them, and then we're going to leave and act like we just won, right? You didn't win. You just exhausted yourselves and accomplished nothing. Now you have to go back and rearm at a minimum. Because guess why? We just took out your bases. It's not like you can just run a bunch of ships and just stack all the stuff that you need throughout the Middle East and rearm from there. Where are you going to go back? To these further out naval bases and stuff like that where you can rearm these ships with cruise missiles and your planes with bombs and all this other stuff, right? And so we're once we back off, if we can get to a place where now America's occupied in something else, like Cuba, like Venezuela, and they can sit there and go, okay, let them come into Cuba. Let them think they've got Venezuela. Now, we've armed them, right? Russia, China, we've armed them. Now, start your insurgency. Once America is in here, maybe even broken relationships with Europe overtaking Greenland, now start your insurgency, right? And all of a sudden, you've got, boom, Iran coming back with all these Russian, Iranian weapons. America is too busy dealing with Mexico because, turns out their government was in bed with the cartel the whole time. Venezuela, turns out we have uprisings in Colombia too. Cuba, turns out these people are, you know what, we're just going to go over to Puerto Rico and mess with them, right? Like, and all of a sudden you have all this stuff going on in Latin America that is right in our backyard that we, remember, we pulled up a bunch of aircraft carriers and stuff like that to do what we did to Venezuela. And then we're like, finish that and moved on to the next thing, okay? Now you have China invade Taiwan. Now you have China cut a deal with South Korea that says, hey, we will help sponsor an eventual unification of North and South Korea if you completely reject America being able to launch sorties from South Korea while we take Taiwan. Good. Now, Japan. What's South Korea going to do? Are you going to 100% ally with Japan, who tried to invade you and take you over 80 years ago, just like they did with China? Nope. So you're now a buffer state between us and Japan. And now what happens? We've just bid for South Korea to stay out of it. China and Japan, do you want to go at it? Because guess what? China's got nukes. Japan does not yet. Japan does not have the resources to launch a war like they did in World War II. They have a lot of technology and they have a lot of industrial capacity. But they don't have the military, they don't have the Navy, they don't have the oil, and they don't have the nukes. Stand down while we take Taiwan. And all of a sudden what you have is the Philippines and Australia and Vietnam going, we would like that you do not try to take over the whole South China Sea. And they'll be like, we'll negotiate on that when we're done. And America, if anything, maybe launches some bombs, maybe does a few things, maybe even destroys the chip plants there so that China can't just absorb that into their economy and completely dominate the chip market of the world. Because we haven't been able to successfully, like I'm here in Arizona where they're building the chip plants, and they are struggling to replicate what they have in Taiwan. It's not so simple as just move a bunch of machines over. There's all the stuff having to do with the land it's on, how stable the land is, the climate, all this different stuff, the supply chain that went into making these chips in Taiwan that they can't just simply just throw up over here. This is a year's process of doing this. And the whole point is, from their angle and from our angle, get your enemy to launch their larger strategic goals before they're ready, and then we have a chance of winning. We're trying to do the same thing they're trying to do. And so what they would love to see, they would love to see Russia and China, is troops on the ground in Iran. And we know it. And so Russia can now negotiate with China. And here's the thing about Donald Trump. Oh, he's the king of the deal. No, he's not. He's not. He's a failed businessman in venture after venture after venture. And the only place he's ever been successful is in New York real estate, because he's worked with the dirtiest, low-down people related to the mobs and their lawyers from his father's generation. That's what he's good at. He is not this master deal maker. He is this BS artist who sells Trump steaks and Trump wine and Trump board games and a bunch of crap that he projects that he's this great businessman, but he's really not. He's not this master negotiator. He's not playing 5D chess, but guess who is? Putin.
Well,
Putin. Putin. This guy's KGB. He's so much smarter than Trump. Yeah, he doesn't have nearly the resources Trump has, but he's so much smarter than Trump. And so now he's dealing with Trump directly, and he's saying, you give us what we want in Ukraine, and here's what we'll do. We will allow you to back out of Iran and save face. Because we can go funnel all the weapons Iran needs for the next 20 years to just keep shooting at your ships. What are you going to resupply with? And oh, by the way, you've already told Cuba you're going to invade them. Do you think we in China can't get weapons to retake Venezuela and put in a government that's more friendly to us, and then from there rearm and power up Cuba and say, well, turns out Cuba's going to be buying, oh, by the way, all of the oil that we're selling now to Iran or to India and Japan because of what you did, we can use that money to now push weapons over into South America while China pushes manufactured goods and power stations and all the other stuff that they need to not need America. And we can do that. Why? Because you dumbass, and Putin can literally be saying this to Donald Trump, you stupid ass, fell for our plan and attacked Iran directly. And you let those Jews suck you into what we wanted you to do from the beginning, because we knew you were never going to succeed in taking over Iran. Now, do you want to save face by backing out of Iran while we advance in Ukraine? And when they do that, when that deal is cut, Trump is going to, I made peace. He's going to tout it for his own legacy. I made peace. I beat the crap out of Iran, and I made Russia settle in Ukraine. He's going to be, and Putin's going to be like, you can tell your people that. You can go get the Nobel Peace Prize and be on Time Magazine and do all that. But 100% of Russia's interests are going to go forward, and ours are going to go back. And then they're going to be like, now go back and try to hold down the Western Hemisphere while China takes Taiwan. We advance in Ukraine. Iran rebuilds, and their plan the entire time was, now we're going to the Middle East full bore. We're putting Assad back in, which is sitting right there, right? He's sitting right there in Russia. North Korea is coming with us because now we've got a reunification deal going on with China that says, we can use all these troops in North Korea over here, and then afterwards come to a peaceful settlement with them in South Korea, and we never needed North Korea now that America's out. We never need North Korea. It's because America went into South Korea that North Korea exists, right? That's why Russia backed out. So if America's out of the picture, we can have a South Korea. They can play balanced power politics between South Korea, Japan, and China till kingdom come. Russia doesn't care. We're going into the Middle East with Iran, and our goals are, once we're in the Middle East, Iran's never going to dominate it. Russia's like, we're going to dominate it. And we can play balance of power politics with all these people, and that was their plan all along, because it's been written down in Zhirinovsky's book since the 90s. And Trump's not reading that book, but it's exactly what the Bible says is going to happen. Now they're going to fail because the Bible says they're going to fail, and that's the Gog-Magog invasion.
So North Korea being Gog and Magog being Russia.
Correct.
Coming down to, Mount Hermon, will they be stopped supernaturally by God on the border of Syria and Israel?
It does not say that they'll be stopped supernaturally by God. You got to remember, God
Okay.
works through agency throughout the Bible.
Of
So
course,
he'll
yes.
say, I'm doing this,
Yeah.
when it's really Assyria or Babylon or whatever who's doing it, right? So if you see how this invasion goes, and if you go to, these are the main things your audience wants to know. If they really want to understand this stuff from the Bible, you're gonna want to read everything related to the Assyrian invasion and the prophets. So that's going to basically be Micah and Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 12 through 20, I believe, are those prophecies that are related, and they're going to have things that were partially fulfilled in around the era of the Assyrian invasion, and their full final fulfillment is going to be in the last days. Just like you have stuff in Daniel that's related to the Greeks and the Persians that's finally fulfilled in the Antichrist. Okay, so you've got those prophecies in Isaiah. Excuse me. In Isaiah, you've got Micah 5, which is talking about Israel. This is why they slap the word lion on what they're doing, is because if you go to Micah 5, it says that we will lay waste the land of Assyria with the sword and the land of Nimrod and the entrances thereof. That's Syria and Iraq. It says that they will be like a lion. It says, let's see, the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people as dew from the Lord, as showers upon the grass that tarrieth not for man or waiteth for the sons of men. In other words, Israel's doing what they want to do. They're not having some other power do
Operation
that.
Roaring Lion.
Right, the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who, if he goes through, both treads down and tears to pieces, and none can deliver. Okay, so they're reading this prophecy. The Jews are reading and projecting this prophecy onto what they're doing right now. Okay, but this, remember, Micah and Isaiah are contemporary. And the bigger picture of this, because if you go back to the previous chapter, it talks about Israel being in Babylon until a certain time. Okay. So now you have those two, and then if you go, you're going to have basically Joel 2, Micah 5, and these prophecies that Isaiah are talking about in the context of the Assyrian invasion, but projecting forward to Gog Magog. And then all of those things are going to be while Assyria is still an empire, because they're primarily about Assyria in their own day, okay? But then Ezekiel is going to come along, and Ezekiel and Daniel are contemporary, and Ezekiel is going to actually be after Assyria has fallen as a nation, and basically the Jews are starting to go into captivity to Babylon. And Ezekiel's in that first wave, and if you look at the people that he says it's going to be Gog of the land of Magog. Okay, so Magog is essentially Mongolia. So Gogoryu, it used to be called Jojo-Sian. I've done a bunch more research on this, but imagine, the most ancient people that we have related to the Mongols would be Gog, and they're called the Xiongnu or the Huns. Okay, they have peoples before that in Ezekiel's day, but we don't have any written records or clear records of who these people were back then. But we know from about a few hundred years later who they were. Okay, we have Meshech and Tubal. Meshech is the Mushgoi, which become Mashgau is the city of the Mushgoi. Okay, it just literally means of the Mushgoi. Okay, so that's Meshech. Tubal is it was in Turkey. The original city was Tabal, and then they move up to Georgia, becomes Tbilisi, which means I believe the descendants of Tabal. Tobolsk means it's basically a Russian term for the people of Tabal. Okay, and Tobolsk is up. If you just follow these cities, it's like Assyria defeats all these cities, so we know they're not Turkey, because Assyria defeated these cities 150 years before Ezekiel wrote this prophecy, and then they deport all their peoples after they defeat their cities. Okay, so the Mashgoi and Tabal in Turkey are no longer these people. They move to their colonies, which is going to be Tbilisi and Tobolsk, and it's going to be Moscow. Okay. And then it says the other people in them is going to be, it says Gomer and all his bands. Gomer is the Sumerians, which some of them do become Celtic peoples, but those seem to be a mixed people. The main people are between the Black and Caspian Seas. That's where the Sumerians are. They have a capital called Gamera. That's Gomer. Tagarma is going to be the Turkmen, and their main countries are basically, it used to be called Turkestan, or Turkmenistan is one of the countries now, but all the Stan countries are basically Turkish countries. And it says the house of Tagarma of the North Quarters. This is why I say Turkey isn't necessarily part of it. The North Quarters usually meant the northeast projection of Israel. Turkey, back when Ezekiel wrote this, there was no Turks there. There were Assyrians and Lydians. Those were the main people groups. And then the kingdom of Urartu, which was Armenia. Okay, so they could have counted as, part of it could have counted as Gomer, but that's really Armenia, because those people have been ethnically cleansed by the Turks since then. And then it says, Tagarma with all his men, many people with thee. And he says, be thou prepared and prepare thyself and those company and those assembled to be me to thee, and be thou a guard unto
So
them. So
what
the
makes sense with Armenia, because Armenia being allied with Russia against Israel, and that Israel
always said that.
arming Azerbaijan. So yes, that
Right.
would
They're
make
like the
sense.
little brother of Russia. Right. So Gog is the main one, and Gog, I've based on my research, Jong is a direct transliteration down the line of Gog. Okay, it's just different linguistic groups of Mongols and Sinites and stuff like that that come together to make Jong over the course of thousands of years. Okay, so Gog seems to be King Kim Jong Un. Now, nobody would look at Jong Un as the head of this thing, except for the fact that Putin is very old and Xi Jinping is very old. So if they were to die soon, which they're that age, or it's just a matter of like who would they expect to lead this coalition after the war? The most senior of them, who's not super old, is Kim Jong Un. And if Kim Jong Un's big power play is saying, "I will nuke America, I will launch a nuke in America, I will," because if anyone's going to give Iran a nuke to Iran, it's going to be North Korea, right? The point of all of this is the leader of this thing is the one. Notice it says Gog, Prince of Magog, and then it talks about the main people with him, which is Meshech and Tubal, which is essentially Georgia and Russia, right? It says a great company with buckler shields, all of them handling swords. They have their own weapons. That's the important thing. Now you look at Gomer, Tagarma, and then it talks about Persia and them. It says those people are, let me see where I can find this, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya, with all of them with shield and helmet, no swords. So the big question, how you interpret this, is where are they getting their weapons from? And the answer is, historically, it's been Russia, right? But who's Russia now getting their weapons from? I mean, they are building back up their military industrial base, but they've been forced to buy shells and stuff like that from North Korea for a while, right? So North Korea is a major player in weapons production, and unless China were to come in this picture and be the weapon supplier to them, and they don't seem to be a part of this. You could argue that China was part of Magog because the Mongols controlled China, but that was thousands of years after this. Typically, the Great Wall of China, the Muslims call it the Wall of Juj and Majuj, and if you look at where it is, it's basically a wall between them and the Mongolians, and the wall between them and the Koreans, because it used to be Goguryeo and it used to extend into Manchuria, right? So the Great Wall of China, China has since expanded their territory northward into what they called Inner Mongolia, because it was Mongol territory, and most of Goguryeo is now Manchuria. Okay, Manchuria just seems to be another transliteration of Mongolia. Okay, so they've basically taken big chunks of the territory from Gog Magog, but they were not the primary peoples of the Gog Magog. The Han Chinese were actually intermarried with all of them because they were on the outsides of the wall. A lot of their peoples were, and so they were intermarried with them. And then they eventually came to take over all of China. And then after that, the Manchu dynasty, which was more Mongolian as well, took over China. But this is all, again, hundreds to thousands of years after Ezekiel's writing, so it's not relevant for back then. So I don't see China as being part of this. And they seem to be positioning themselves like Turkey to be the main powers in the New World Order after World War III is done. And that makes sense. If Turkey just holds their ground, which everything they're doing militarily seems to be to hold their ground and make sure the Kurds don't make gains, and then China's is to get Taiwan and make sure that they're able to project economically.
Which is why Turkey said they might invade the Iran border, just on the border, just to keep from Kurds coming across the border. They've said that.
Right, and China wants to expand their economic sphere, but China has never, ever been a power that has tried to project militarily outside of their borders, with the exception of the Han Chinese basically guarding the Sogdia region, which is basically the Stan countries just east of China, because that was part of their Silk Road trade towards Parthia and all that. And so they were guarding it against invasions from northern Mongolias, while these people traded towards the south, towards India and Iran. But because you have the Himalayas and the Gobi Desert around them, it's just as hard for them to project power outward as anyone else to project power towards them. And so their optimal situation would always be to be a major economic player, control their population, be uninvadable, and always be at the big seat of the table in the World Security Council, whatever it turns out to be, right?
Now, this is breaking news. This is something that might change some of what's going on. We'll see. Senator Richard Blumenthal came out and said that the military is discussing directly with Congress about deploying troops on the ground in Iran.
That
And
would be
so,
the worst thing we could do.
agreed, yes.
It would be a humiliating defeat. If we wanted to do that, we should have did that while we were holding Iraq and Afghanistan. Our window for doing that is over.
It's not good if we do that.
No, if we wanted to do that, we should have done that while Russia was bogged down with Ukraine. We should have had Europe and everybody saying, throw as much as you can at Ukraine fighting Russia right now. While we're still in Iraq and Afghanistan, we start doing this.
Now, from what I heard is what's the island off of Iran that's crucial for oil?
I don't know. I know what you're talking about.
Trump was talking about taking in the 80s. So I've heard that that's where they were going to put boots on the ground, is that specific island.
I actually, when I was a recruiter, I talked to an electronic engineer that worked on that island. I forget the name of the island though, but
you
it's
know what I'm
like,
talking about, though.
yeah, they've got all kinds of like oil processing plants there and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that might be where they're considering doing it. Karg Island.
Okay, so yeah, if they were to just take a little island off of Iran, that's not the same as boots on the ground in Iran.
Correct. And Trump has been talking about taking Karg Island since the 80s.
Right, and of course they don't want to they don't want to, throw missiles at it because it's their own stuff.
I'm not saying
But
it's going to happen, but that is something that they
no,
are
I
kind
mean
of
that would be
signaling.
something that we could do to pester them. But again, Trump is Trump is stuck.
Yeah.
This is where it's becoming obvious that Trump really doesn't have a plan. He's got people surrounding him that are like, "We're America, we're unstoppable. Do whatever you want," right? And you've always had these different people who have different strategic interests and be like, now we can finally get that. Oh, we're gonna put Marco Rubio as the president of Cuba.
Yeah.
This is like why? Because he has these different electoral bases who he's pandered to vote for him. And it's like, of course, these Cuban refugees would love to see Cuba overthrown because these are the descendants of people who all had their land seized when the communist revolution took over. Of course, they would want to see going back to Cuba and getting their lands back. And now they have lands in the U.S. and in Cuba in their rich families, right? Of course. The idea of Marco Rubio and maybe he made a deal with Marco Rubio. You be my mouthpiece for all this bull crap I'm going to be, and eventually I'll liberate Cuba, and you could be the president of Cuba. Marco Rubio might go for that. But we're not gonna be successful by doing this. But again, yeah, Turkey or we could easily beat Cuba. We always could. But we have everything we want in Cuba. We always have. We have the bases there, right? And the people who wanted to overthrow it, it was such a limited few rich people that wanted to do it, just like the guys who overthrew Guatemala for their bananas, right? It was a few limited rich people because why? Because they had friends who had casinos and resorts and stuff like there, and they just want to overthrow Cuba because the revolution took their stuff, right? And they tried to do it through the CIA, and it
Yeah.
was so pointless and unpopular that Kennedy put a stop to it, and that's why they killed Kennedy, right? But these are rich people serving their own friends and their own private interests through the CIA. It's never been in America's interest to control Cuba when we have a base in Cuba
Yeah, Guantanamo
that
Bay.
we bought for $1 and we have forever. Like that's all we've ever wanted in Cuba, And Cuba's never going to have the capacity to just take that by force from us, unless they're backed by Russia and China, and it's just way too hard for Russia or China to project power all the way to a place right on our border without us being able to stop them. Like if we were ever content with just the Monroe Doctrine, we would have won. The whole point is empires fall through overextension, and
Yeah.
what our competitors want to see is us get overextended, bogged down in a war like Russia was with Afghanistan before the Soviet Union fell.
Well, Israel dragging us to the Middle East, right?
This is perfect for them. They love it. And Israel loves it because they think they're going to be able to play the balance of power game after we're out of the Middle East and basically balance off their interests with the Saudis and the Turks against the Russians and Iranian and be the central player in the Middle East. That's what they think.
Yeah.
They also have enough people in Israel who believe religiously that this is Israel winning, because in Israel's eschatology, they believe Gog Magog is Armageddon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they believe they win, and then they go into the Messianic age. Okay? Now, I don't believe Netanyahu believes this. I believe Netanyahu is playing off a base of his electorate that believes this, just like Trump is playing off a Christian nationalist base of electorate and saying, "Oh yeah, let's do it," right? They're using the political what do you call it? The political cash or whatever you've got to do these things that project power that make themselves look good. But Trump doesn't have an ambition besides to say, be able to walk away saying, I made a bunch of money for me and my family, and I made America great again. That's his goal.
See, right here, being published by the New York Post, why the Iran war might come down to control of one tiny island, which is Karg Island. So they're telegraphing that.
Yeah, and I'm sure they would try to take it, but again, taking it and holding it are two different things.
That is true. Yeah, yeah, that is true.
And that's the thing is, like, Trump talks about his wider ambitions, and I know there's people who are like, yeah, he's 5D chess, and again, yeah, does he want to see himself as this great peacemaker and have this great legacy? Of course. Everything that you hear coming out of his mouth and out of his character says he's a vain man who wants to do whatever he wants and then leave a legacy behind him of having he's as carnal as you can be. Leave a legacy behind him as having been a good person who accomplished good things after being a completely lustful, greedy, covetous, wicked, lying, scandalous person who's just fulfilled the lust of his flesh his entire life. That's what all the great, wicked, carnal kings of the world have ever wanted, right? Now build a statue to me and say how great I was and just talk about my accomplishments and not about how evil I was, right? There's no depth to him when you're just really paying attention. There is no depth to him. And if you listen to the people that were behind him from the beginning, people who know him up close were saying he didn't really want to be he didn't really think he was going to be president. This was just about making his name relevant, but he's started to smoke his own stuff.
Did you see he's posted? I gotta go. I gotta pick up my son. Did you see he posted the Kim Clement prophecy about him on his Truth Social?
It wouldn't shock me. Well, and that's the thing. He may be believing his own stuff now, and the Israelis have been pulling on him. And I'm arguing that I think from the beginning, I think Jared Kushner put him in power, not himself. And Jared Kushner is definitely an asset of the Israeli state.
Have you ever heard that false prophecy?
I have, yeah. Trump will be a trumpet or blah, blah, blah. And then he talks about Bill Gates is going to be the gate of some wealth or whatever. Well, and again, these guys, just like the Paul Canes and these other ones, who Paul Kane seems to be behind Joel Richardson's stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're projecting
the greater Turkey in Islamic Antichrist.
Counter eschatology that lines up with Jewish and Islamic eschatology.
Yeah.
That's important, and this is why we need to go over this stuff and then the stuff what the Bible says about the Antichrist, because the Jewish and Islamic eschatology smushes it all together into one, and they make Messiah or Mahdi Christ when he's Antichrist, right? And Joel Richardson seems to get that somewhat, but he's playing right into their modus operandi by merging Gog Magog with Armageddon, which he does. Well, if you understand that was Kim Clement, we now know Kim Clement was a CIA asset, and we know Paul Kane was a CIA asset. And so you have Kim Clement and now Joel Richardson, who was on Glenn Beck, post 9/11, parroting probably stuff he got from Mike Bickle and Paul Kane, which was probably based on American power projection that they fed into the prophetic right to push us towards a Christian nationalism that people think is backed by prophecy. And this isn't new. We can go all the way back to the Essenes and the Zealots in Judaism before 70 AD, and they were doing it too.
Yep.
The Jews are doing it now. The Christians are doing it now. Fake prophecies as a way to get people on board with a political agenda is not something new. They did it in the Reformation, right? The popes are the Antichrist, and so we're going to do this. Oliver Cromwell's like, we're going to usher in the millennium by bringing the Jews back, and we're going to project English power throughout the world, right? And these movements have always ended in disaster for Christians, 100% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Anything you want to say in closing, brother?
No, I would just challenge your readers to, really read these prophecies in Isaiah 12 through 20, read Micah 4 through 5, and really read the whole prophecy and try to understand it in context as being partially fulfilled in the ancient past with Assyria, and then projecting that on Gog Magog, and then go read Joel 2 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Revelation 6, and try to align the same things together and see the picture, because this is what's leading us into Daniel's 70th week, not Armageddon. This is the biggest thing you need to know. This is not Armageddon. This is the prologue to the Antichrist coming, because the whole point of this is when the Antichrist comes, somebody can make the claim that the Antichrist fell in the Gog Magog war, and the Antichrist is Christ. That's what the devil's plan is. So we know what his plan is because our God wrote it down for us. But we want to make sure we're reading what the Bible says and not just listening to pundits on eschatology and saying, "Oh, well, they're saying this is that." Understand these people are hacks. These are people out to make money and out to have a little name for themselves. They are not really deep Bible scholars, because most of your deep Bible scholars want nothing to do with prophecy. That's the sad thing.
Yeah, a lot of them are doing research into kind of dating certain texts in the Bible or the earliest,
Pretty much everything but eschatology.
exactly, yeah, it's
They're getting
sortorology.
they're getting a lot of good information to the front and to the mainstream, but the one thing they all have in common is they don't want to touch eschatology with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Tell everybody where they can find you, brother.
I'm at Underground Publishing. I'm probably not going to do a lot in eschatology, but my next video is going to cover Luke 21, which is going to cover some eschatology. I do have a long eschatological apologetics playlist if you guys want to listen to a whole bunch of stuff. I go over all these prophecies in detail, but again, read them for yourselves. You can listen to my stuff as a supplement to kind of help you connect the dots between these different prophecies. But if you really want the full picture, get my book, The Revelation Every Eye Will See Him. It's going to document pretty much how World War III is going to go down, plus what's going to happen with the New World Order after that, based almost entirely on just what the Bible flat out says.
And
So,
I'll definitely put it in the show notes.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, other than that, John and I, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about Gog Magog, but tailing into where the Antichrist seems to arise in this, and the specific things that the Antichrist has to do,
Hmm.
which John and I both agree, Donald Trump has not done those things yet.
Hmm.
He does project in that direction, but he hasn't
Hmm.
fulfilled anything that the Antichrist is supposed to do yet. So we're going to cover what those main things are, so you guys can see this and go, okay, he has to do this, 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 and ultimately sit in the temple and claim he's God before you can say, we know he's the Antichrist. And I really believe you can't say we know someone's the Antichrist until then.
Yes.
I think that's what the Bible is telling us. So we'll go over the proof text for that and kind of help you guys paint a picture of how we see it could go this way or could go this way. But the main thing is know what the Bible says so you can be useful to the people around you, pointing them to the Bible being true and Christ being Lord, and hopefully lead people to Christ, because
Amen.
this is probably the last push for the gospel in the year over this decade, if not the next 5 years, if not the next 3 years. And so you want to be useful during that time to God, and you want to be of some benefit to people, not just be another one of these endless speculators who don't know what they're talking about.
Amen. All right, brother. Take care, everyone. God bless. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Thank you. Thank you as always, brother. Bye. Bye, Aaron.